Chinese state media likes to brag about public trust in China, but in reality, Chinese people appear to be losing heart, and there's only one way to reverse it. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. If you want to stay up to date on the latest China news, subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. Link is below. Are you tired of being suspicious all the time? Of living in a place where trust and acceptance are so hard to come by that even the colors of a dress have torn families apart for a decade? Personally, I think it's green and lavender because I'm an agent of chaos. But if you're looking for a high-trust society, then oh boy, do I have the place for you. It's called China. Because in China, public trust is more abundant than the names of powerful people in the Epstein files, allegedly. Nowhere in China is this more true than the faith people put in the government. Chinese people trust the local authorities. They trust the central authorities, and they super trust the center of the central authorities. It's like a turducken of authority. Don't believe me? Just look at what China Daily has to say on the matter. The Chinese level of trust in the government has topped a global list. But it's not just the Chinese lapdog media that are saying this. They're drawing on surveys and studies done by international organizations such as the U.S. public relations company Edelman, which publishes an annual report on public trust called the Edelman Trust Barometer. Chinese state-run media love citing the Edelman report, like when Xinhua reported that Chinese citizens' trust in their government had topped 90% according to Edelman. That's because the company repeatedly scores China as the country with the highest level of trust in government. Trust them to do what exactly? Murder protesters and then pretend it never happened? Then yeah, I trust them more than any government to do that. But these are some solid numbers. For example, according to Edelman, in 2022, 91% of Chinese people expressed trust in the government, while in 2023, that number was 89%. That's impressive, especially since 2022 was during the worst of China's COVID lockdowns, when Chinese people across the country took to the streets to protest the government's zero COVID policy and even called for Chinese leader Xi Jinping and the CCP to step down. Something seems fishy here. And a closer look at Edelman's research confirms it. You see, while the company had ample opportunity in other countries to ask respondents all sorts of political questions, that was not the case in China. Instead, certain questions were left out, such as whether the country is more divided currently than in past times, and whether the government and official media release trustworthy information. Which seems odd that in a survey on government trustworthiness, they forgot to ask if the government is trustworthy. That'd be like giving a math quiz and only asking art history questions. Edelman explained these omissions in 2023, saying that because some of the content we ask is deemed politically sensitive, there are several countries where we take special precautions in order to avoid putting our respondents or ourselves in a position to break any local laws. Pro tip, if you're breaking the law by asking questions, you don't even need to do a survey. You can already tell how trustworthy that government is. On that front, Chinese law stipulates that China's Bureau of Statistics should work with the State Council or Cabinet to supervise and manage foreign-related surveys conducted at a national level. Those institutions are all tied to the Chinese Communist Party, so in other words, Chinese law demands that such surveys are overseen by the CCP. But hey, you can trust them in this survey about whether or not you can trust them. Trust me. The CCP is obsessed with telling China's story well, which is just a different way of saying no negative stories about the Chinese government are allowed, which is the perfect atmosphere for a trustworthy survey on trustworthiness. It's like trusting a kid when he says he's the most handsome special boy in the world and the only person he asked was his mother. She's obviously lying, because my mom said I'm the most handsome special boy in the world. Even without direct government meddling, it's widely known among researchers that carrying out surveys on political topics is very tricky in China. Chinese respondents can't be sure who's going to end up looking at their answers and what the repercussions might be if they fail to tell China's story well. They could end up like the Tiananmen Square protesters that all went home and were perfectly fine. Shut up and stop asking questions about it. So their responses are, well, anything but trustworthy. Overall, what this means is that we can't really trust the Chinese media hype and reports like Edelman's to gauge public trust in China. You know you messed up when you lose trust in your trustworthiness survey. You literally had one job. But there are ways to gauge the level of trust in China. You just have to come at it from kind of sideways. And when we do, an image emerges of a society where public trust is approaching rock bottom. Take what Chinese people are saying about inequality and the economy. Last year, a team of researchers from across China and the US released the results of 20 years worth of data collection on Chinese people's perception of economic inequality. They found that Chinese people in 2004 predominantly attributed wealth to things like ability and talent and hard work, while they attributed poverty to things like lack of ability and lack of effort. These days, though, Chinese people instead primarily attributed wealth to things like connections and growing up in a rich family, while poverty was attributed to unequal opportunities and an unfair economic system. Wow, it's almost like you can't trust the promise of a worker's paradise in a communist utopia. In fact, one of the sharpest rises over the 20-year period was the view that wealth and poverty in today's China are explained by an unfair economic system. So what does this have to do with public trust? Well, in the absence of political rights in China, the CCP has built a lot of its legitimacy in recent decades on development and economic opportunities for the Chinese people. It's part of what has become known as the unofficial Chinese social contract. The CCP oversees growing prosperity, and in turn, Chinese people stay out of politics. Although no Chinese person actually signed on to anything like this, it was more of a we'll tell you what to do and you're going to like it arrangement, only without them worrying if they actually like it. But if there is no growing prosperity, as we've seen on this channel time and time again, and Chinese people largely believe that economic success or failure are based on an unfair system, well, the CCP's legitimacy starts to fall apart. And Xi Jinping's emphasis on boosting common prosperity starts to look a little ridiculous. But there are other signs that public trust in China is abysmal. You see, in recent years, several Chinese regions have faced intense rainfall that has led to heavy flooding and massive landslides. It's resulted in thousands of people having to abandon their homes. Yet when local governments try to raise funds from the public for disaster relief, it rarely amounts to much. That's not because Chinese people don't care about their fellow citizens, but after a number of scandals in the charity sector, from fraudulent fundraising to the strange case of a charity donating money to the Chinese government, public trust in charities seems to have eroded away. And yes, you heard me right, a charity donated to the CCP. And I can't tell if that proves they're despicable or destitute. Porque no los dos. The Chinese people also have a serious lack of trust in their own food, perhaps for obvious reasons. But it gets worse. In 2008, a Chinese infant formula product that had been deliberately contaminated with a dangerous chemical led to 6 deaths and 300,000 Chinese children getting sick. After that, Chinese people dumped local brands in droves and went searching for foreign products on the global market instead. But it's not just food either. Last year, many Chinese women also began turning away from local hygiene products, after it came out that some of them are produced from materials contaminated by things like mold and maggots. People don't trust the CCP, you say? Public distrust apparently runs so deep that even seemingly positive stories that end up happily often end up being met by frosty and skeptical responses. For example, in 2023, a Chinese woman named Yu Yanyan was on her honeymoon in Tibet when she came close to losing her life in a car crash. But thanks to timely blood donations by locals and Yu's evacuation in a chartered plane, she survived and made a full recovery. All's well that ends well, right? But on Chinese social media, the story quickly started revolving around Yu's privilege. people began referring to her as Sister Blood Points, and some claimed angrily that an ordinary Chinese patient would never have received such treatment. Man, forget seizing the means of production. China's making people so communist they literally want blood. Also in 2023, a similar public backlash struck a Chinese lottery player that won around $30 million after purchasing about 50,000 lottery tickets with the same winning number. The peculiar winning strategy is not necessarily a sign that the winner somehow cheated, but it's nonetheless attracted widespread attention and suspicion, probably because there have been several cases of corruption in the lottery over the years. And if we can't trust degenerate gamblers, then really, who can we trust? So what does all this say? Well, it says a few things about a general state of disillusionment in Chinese society. It doesn't matter whether it's the lottery, a chartered plane, or last month's hospital scandal that exposed plagiarism and favoritism at the top of the Chinese medical community. The Chinese public is sick of an entrenched elite that games the system to their own advantage and to the disadvantage of ordinary people. AKA what happens literally every time someone tries communism. But I'm sure the next time they'll do it right. They are also fed up with corrupt organizations and companies enriching themselves at the cost of victims of natural disasters and children. And they're tired of an economic system that was supposed to deliver common prosperity, but has actually left many feeling worse off. AKA what happens literally every time someone tries communism. No, but sure, go on. I'm sure the next folks to try it, they'll finally get it right. So yeah, the situation is bad, but something needs to be done. But what? The CCP has already unleashed relentless waves of purges and anti-corruption campaigns in recent years to try and get rid of the so-called bad apples. But clearly that hasn't restored much trust, since the roots to the apple tree itself are also bad. You can't really revitalize a system if you're unwilling to change it or the people at the very top of it, no matter how many people in the lower ranks you lock up. Just to stick with the tree analogies, that'd be like trying to remove a tree by trimming a few branches and going, ta-da! That's the big issue here. The CCP co-opted the whole system long ago and quashed any dissenting voices in the process. They broke it, so they own it. Any widespread dissatisfaction about the current situation in China is bound to fall back on the CCP eventually. After all, there are no Chinese elites as dominant and entrenched as the leader who is set to rule for life, and his political party that has been in power for more than 75 years. So it's very likely that public trust won't and can't be fully restored as long as the CCP remains in power. Unfortunately, they have proven time and time again that they are not going anywhere willingly. But with the economy tanking, the CCP might find itself getting forced out. For more on that, check out this episode exclusively on the China Uncensored premium website, ChinaUncensored.tv. Just click this button right here that's been on screen. There's a lot of great stuff on the website that we don't put on YouTube. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.